So this is strategy for the next focuses that Peer-to-Peer Foundation is working on.
Yeah.
And it is for the people in the peer-to-peer community to comment, discuss, see, get clarity, so that we can work together to create this.
Okay, so my name is Michel Bauwens from the P2P Foundation, and the slide that you see in front of you is kind of an attempt to do a summary of our different proposals. So we've been observing the emergence of what we call commons-oriented peer production. And we believe this is a new model to produce and distribute value in the world and to solve a number of crises that the current system is creating. Okay, so here's how we start. I believe there's three types of responses to the crisis today. One is sustainability. People want to create a way of producing things that doesn't destroy the environment. In a way, you could say it's peering with nature, right? It's considered nature as a partner, not something to be exploited. Then there is a second response, which you see here in the middle. It's called openness. So this is about creating commons, about sharing knowledge, mutualizing resources. And that's the second response. Then there's a third response, which is the solidarity economy or the cooperative economy. This is more about social justice. As we produce together, can we make sure that the results of our work are also distributed more fairly? Now, one of the things that is happening is that these three types of reactions don't talk to each other. They're fragmented. And so one of the first things we need to do is to create meta-economic networks. It's to look at locally how we can combine these things in a growing alternative economy. Two particular bridges need to be worked on, and you see in the middle between sustainability and openness, we put the open source circular economy, which is the convergence between sustainability and openness. And why is this important? Well, imagine, if all the logistical information is private, how can you ever do a circular economy? It needs to be open. You need to know what's being produced, and that way you can adapt your own production to this. The other important intervention concerns the convergence between the open models and the solidarity economic models. There again, there's not necessarily a bridge now between them. And so we call for open cooperativism. And this is a new model of cooperatives, because cooperatives, even though they're democratic in their structure, one man, one vote, they end up always competing within the capitalist system, and then instead of a entrepreneurial selfishness, you get a cooperative selfishness. And after 20, 30 years, it's hard to see the difference between a co-op and a regular company. So following the model of the solidarity cooperatives in Italy, we propose that an open co-op has 4 characteristics. The first one is a common good orientation. So it's not a profit maximizing entity. It's there to create something like good healthcare or healthy food. And the profit is realized, serves to expand the realization of that common good. Second characteristic is multi-stakeholder ownership. So all the people who are using or getting the results of this activity should have a say. So you have a co-production of the service. Think about, if you have diabetes, you're co-producing the healthcare because you have a different vision than a doctor on what you need. The third thing is very important, this is new, is you need to also contribute to the commons. So as a co-op, you're not just working for yourself. Because you use open licenses, you're actually creating commons that other people can use. Eventually, you can also think about creating physical commons that other people can use. I also insist on a fourth point, which is a global organization, which is to think not just about your local needs, but to create more power for these alternatives by connecting on a higher scale. We also propose something called a copy fair license. And why do we do this? Today the open licenses have a paradoxical effect. The more open the license, the more capitalistic the economy. So if you let everybody work with the commons, then the people with more resources will tend to dominate. So it's the multinational companies that dominate the free software economy. And so what we would like to see is that the people who are creating the commons create open co-ops to create their own livelihoods and to keep the surplus value within that sphere so they can reinvest in the commons and reproduce themselves. And this copy fair license says that anybody can use the commons for non-profit, non-commercial purposes. If you make a profit and you contribute, it's also fine, but you cannot use it for profit and not contribute. So it creates the requirement to discuss what reciprocity means and therefore to recreate a moral economy, a moral marketplace. So I call this the ethical entrepreneurial coalition. Of all the people who create their livelihoods around this common good. So imagine you have Linux as the commons, well then you have free software cooperatives that create livelihoods around the production of Linux. Now let's go a bit more in detail. I look at sustainability, you see at the bottom microfactories. Why microfactories? Because the new model says basically that what's heavy is local and what's open is global. What light is global. So you create global open design communities where the knowledge is shared, where the commons is created at a global scale, but then you actually produce locally, which is very important for sustainability because today 2/3 of the production cost is actually transportation. So imagine an economy where you have microfactories where people produce on demand based on real social need. And they download the latest designs and then they produce it themselves using a new type of machinery like 3D printing, etc. I also put there global and open supply chains because I think we need to open up the supply chain information and the logistics information. And why would we do that? Well, if you have an entrepreneurial coalition that has a solidarity around the commons that is bound by a social charter and an open license, then you have a different relationship with each other. You may still be competing, say, because you're better than another company, but you still are co-creating that commons. Therefore, it makes sense to open up and share more than in a classic competitive model. Hence, the open supply chain, open book accounting. In the middle circle, you see something called contributory accounting, and this is a new way of recognizing today that it's not just about wage labor, that many other people are contributing to this collective common good, and therefore they should be recognized. So what you want to do is you want to create a relationship between the income and the contributions. And contributory accounting allows you to do that. You record the contributions, and if a market value is created later on, you have a fair social contract so that the value can be redistributed within the community of contributors. Under solidarity, you will see at the bottom common fare, and this is basically the idea that, at least in the Western countries, all the solidarity mechanisms are based on the salary, but the salary condition is actually diminishing. There's less and less people getting salaries, and more people are precarious. These precarious workers are often networked and actually producing commons, so it's a real social condition. And common fare is all the innovations they are bringing in terms of mutual solidarity. It's very similar to the workers' movement when the farmers were expelled from their land in the 16th, 17th century and they became labor. They had to sell their labor to survive. They invented mutualities, insurances. So when we say common fare, we're saying that we need to reform the welfare state. We need to reform the solidarity mechanism so it's not only favoring people with a salary, but it's good for everyone, every citizen. Okay, so this is basically the economic model, and if you look at the bottom, you see Open Cooperative Development Agency. Here's a problem. Just an example. If you make, like Wikispeed, a open source car that is 5 times as fuel efficient as any industrial car, and then you go to an ethical finance bank, what do they tell you? Well, they ask you for your patents. Well, you don't have patents and you don't want to have patents because patents privatize the knowledge that you want to share. So what do? Well, you don't get the money. right? So there is a fundamental problem here to solve. What we need is a production system that has all three at the same time. It's based on sustainable production, it's in balance with nature, it's based on mutualizing knowledge and eventually other resources, and it's based on solidarity, so on a just and fair distribution of the rewards. We need financing, we need resources for production that is all three at the same time. And this is going to be a big challenge, because today, we have these commons-oriented peer production, but all the resources are still in the hands of people who want to develop unsustainable products. So how do we change that? It's going to be a really big challenge that requires a convergence between the cooperative economy, which already today hires more people than the multinationals, with these open models, and also with the care for sustainability. Now, when we move up, we look at politics. Now, I want to make a general argument. If you look at peer production, it creates three new institutions. The first one is the contributory community. All the people contributing to that particular common good. The second one is the ethical entrepreneurial coalition. All the people creating livelihoods around that common. The common is abundant, but you need services. You need to live, so you can be paid for your labor, etc., etc. So that's the second institution. The third one is that we see they have for benefit associations like the Wikimedia Foundation, the Linux Foundation, and others. They don't work like a classic NGO. They don't see the world in terms of scarcity. There is a problem, we need resources, we'll direct the resources. They see it in terms of abundance. They see there is a problem, there's enough people who can contribute to that solving that problem. So let's maintain and create a platform of cooperation. So they enable and empower individual and social autonomy and that particular system of peer production in a quite different way than the classic NGOs. For me, this is also actually a vision of a new society in which civil society becomes productive because citizens can and do contribute to these commons. In which the marketplace has become an ethical marketplace because you have a marketplace that co-produces value, that co-creates the commons. And finally, these for-benefit associations give a new vision of the state as a facilitatory institution. The state, the partner state, is what allows people through infrastructures, shared infrastructures, to actually do this. So how do we get there politically? My argument is the following. At least in the West, the welfare state, the solidarity mechanisms we have were based on the strength of labor, and labor is declining. So what do? I believe the commons is the new glue, because all the citizens are potentially related to creating the common good in their life. So this productive civil society should organize itself. And what I propose is something called the Assembly of the Commons. All the local people contributing to common good, to the commons, should create a forum, start talking to each other, share their experiences, but also create policy proposals and start supporting those people in the political world which are for the commons. Not one party, but the individuals within different parties that go for this. And the idea is to recreate political power from the bottom up. The other institution that I propose is the Chamber of the Commons, because today we have the Chamber of Commerce, and of course they're not going to protect and defend the ethical economy. And so we need the entrepreneurial coalitions, the ethical entrepreneurial coalitions, to form an organized Chamber of the Commons, to do the same thing as the Assembly of the Commons, but for the commons economy. And again, bottom up, recreate a new kind of policy and politics. At the very top, and this is still the future, this is not something that's happening yet, but I believe it's a logical outcome. Eventually, we need to globalize these practices. So I use the words of files, which in Greek meant clans or tribe, and it comes from a science fiction book, The Diamond Age, from Neil Stephenson. Some people may be familiar with the Ecuadorian people. They're indigenous people. You find them all over Europe, and they are making New Age pan flute music and selling llama wool. Well, they're actually a community in a valley in Ecuador where 1/3 of their GDP is generated through these activities. And they're not a business. They're a community that has developed this system to sustain their community. So a file is a business ecosystem that creates a livelihood at a global scale for communities and their commons. And I think they should be organized on a global scale. So what we have today, we have multinational companies, but we don't have a counterpower. So file is a counterpower to the power of these, more predatory forms of capital. They're generative capital. Equally a bit utopian at this stage is what I call united transnational republics. Okay, it sounds a bit strange, but just follow me here. The P2P Foundation itself, we're not national. We are people from all over the world collaborating on the creation of a common knowledge base for this change. And there are other groups like this. So the idea is to unite these global civic organizations and create kind of united people's organization based on these global affinity groups that, as I explained, are quite different from traditional NGOs. So in the middle, what you see is called the Commons Transition Plan. And this is how we get from here to there. This is a set of proposals, a set of transition proposals that allow us to go from an economy that is based on private wealth creation and distribution to a model of common value creation and distribution. We did this for the Ecuadorian, not for the government, for 3 governmental institutions in Ecuador. And we looked at how can an economy look like that will work around a commons in every field of human activity. So you'd have a science commons, an education commons, but also an agricultural commons and a industrial commons. All that knowledge would be shared by all citizens, all entrepreneurs, all public officials. How do we get there? So we asked ourselves 3 questions. One is, what are the feeding mechanisms? What do we need to produce to get a common like that? Then we looked at the material conditions and the immaterial conditions, the rules and the regulations. I can't go into detail, but we have there an integrative view of such a commons-oriented transition. What we did not do, because that wasn't the mandate in this particular project, and we still need to do that, but other people have done this, but we need to synthesize that work, is how do we make housing into a common? How do we protect housing so that poor people can afford housing and are not expelled because of land speculation? So systematically we can look at how physical resources can be mutualized in the same way and kept out of the speculative economy. So this is a way, and one of the means to do this could be what I call a commons coalition. What are the social movements, the political parties which are sympathetic to such a transition and can use the commons and the commons transition plan as a glue to actually achieve this? And I think we can actually obtain social majorities doing this. At least in Europe we have, like the pirate parties. 27% of the voting intentions in Iceland. These are the people of the digital culture. We have a very powerful green movement, 5, 10, 15% in different countries who want to protect the environment. So they have a natural affinity with nature as a commons. We have this new wave of radical parties like Syriza and Podemos, and especially actually a coalition that calls itself In Common that won the elections in Barcelona. These are parties that have been socialized and culturalized in the big social movements 2011, the Occupy movement, the Indignados, and Syntagma Square in Greece. And this was a real peer production of politics. This was not traditional organizing. They were using the same templates, the same protocols, the same organizational forms as open source communities. And then we have progressive social entrepreneurs, etc. I believe we have a demographic and political majority that is potential there, and I think Barcelona proves that it can be done. So here you have it. This is basically a set of proposals that can advance the cause of the commons. And I hope you were interested in the explanation and that you want to build further on it. Of course, this is not a blueprint, but I would say that it is based on, first of all, an observation of what people are actually doing, and then thinking about what kind of interventions can advance the movement as a whole. And thanks for listening to me and for thinking about it and eventually for improving and adding your own insights.